Welcome, and prepare to journey back to a time of gilded cages and whispers, to a story that refuses to be silenced. The axe had not yet fallen, but in her heart she had already died 100 times. Catherine Howard stood barefoot on the scaffold, her breath misting in the cold morning air, like a final prayer she had no right to utter. 19 years old, barely more than a child, she was already a widow of dignity, of innocence, of history. They say she was shaking. They say she knelt with grace, begging for forgiveness. Yet history always speaks louder than girls, and it rarely listens back. She was the Queen of England, and she was about to be erased. To understand how a crown became a shroud, how a girl became a ghost within her own name, we must return not to a grand throne room, but to a broken hallway filled with forgotten girls and locked doors. Catherine was bane into noise. The household of the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk was no true home. It was a holding pen for the disposable daughters of minor nobility, girls raised not to speak, but simply to survive. Catherine was one among dozens, a Howard of little perceived use. The house itself reeked of overboiled meat and hidden secrets.
Her first memories were not of gentle lullabies, but of hushed whispers behind closed curtains. She was taught to curtsy before she could read, and to smile before she could even name her own feelings. Somewhere between endless embroidery lessons and the constant smell of burnt porridge, she learnt a most important lesson. Henry Manox, the music teacher, smelled of wine and dark expectation, whispering compliments that were subtle traps. He would kiss her fingers when no one looked. Catherine never said no, for she simply did not know how. No one had ever taught her that no was an option. When the Duchess finally discovered what was happening, she dismissed it as mere childish folly. Then came Francis Derham, older and far more insistent. He did not ask, he simply took. And the Duchess? She merely sighed, turned her face away, and instructed the girls to keep their voices down.
By the time Catherine arrived at court, she was already fluent in the language of silence. King Henry VIII saw her once, and that was enough to seal her fate. He was swollen with years and pain, his leg a festering wound, hidden beneath layers of rich velvet. But Catherine, bright, tiny, and 17 at most, was everything he was not. She exuded the scent of youth. She moved with the lightness of laughter itself. To him, she was not a person, but a cherished memory made flesh. He married her within months.
They called her the rose without a thorn, yet roses often lie. In public she smiled, she danced, she dipped strawberries in cream and fed them to the king with her fingers. Courtiers whispered that she had revived the old man, restoring spring to the English court. Foreign ambassadors took note of this child bride with eyes like sunlight, charming, naive, and seemingly perfect. But in private, the rot began again. The king's ulcers bled through bandages. His moods cracked like old marble. Catherine learned to mask her disgust with a veneer of devotion. She kissed his hand, listened to his endless stories, and every night she curled into sheets that smelled of iron and vinegar, praying he would fall asleep before he touched her.
Then, inevitably, the past returned. It began as a trickle of gossip. A chambermaid mentioned a name, Derham. A groom records something strange about the Duchess's household. One by one, whispers solidified into words, and words escalated into formal inquiries. Francis Derham, sensing danger, foolishly attempted to buy silence with arrogance, seeking power. Catherine, however, gave him nothing. The king's council began to circle, and Archbishop Cranmer delivered the devastating news to the king with trembling hands. Catherine had not come to court pure. Worse, she had kept secrets. Treason, they called it. Adultery, high crime against the crown. Yet no one bothered to ask why a girl raised among wolves might not have known the rules of sheep. She was locked in her rooms, not yet the tower, no, not yet. But the very walls seemed to have changed, growing cold and watchful. Guards now observed her every move. Her maids wept in silent despair. Food arrived without warmth, a stark reminder of her isolation. Catherine, still barely more than a child, sat beneath gilded ceilings and waited for her name to become a death sentence. She wrote letters, pleading her case, confessing only what she understood. Historians would later dissect her words, debating her guilt, but Catherine was not writing to be remembered. She was writing simply to stay alive.
And then, inevitably, the tower came. Stone, iron, cold. She was taken at night, without procession or crowd, only the sound of hushed footsteps and whispers. They placed her in the very same rooms her cousin Anne Boleyn had occupied before her own execution. The chilling symmetry was lost on no one. 2 queens, 2 wives, 2 girls made to smile for a king who tragically mistook desire for love. The tower has no clocks. Time itself seems to break there. She waited.
It is said she asked to rehearse. The night before her death, she demanded a block be brought to her chamber. There, in the cold solitude, she practiced placing her neck upon it, again and again. It was a girl preparing for a grim state performance in which she had no lines, only a final, irreversible exit. The next morning, the sky was a solemn grey. She wore a plain gown, devoid of any royal embellishment. She walked without help, her steps steady, and when she knelt, she did not cry. She spoke her last words clearly. "I die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Culpeper." They say she forgave everyone but herself. They even say she smiled. But this is not merely a story of death. It is a story of forgetting. Catherine was buried without fanfare. No statue erected, no epitaph carved, no mourning observed in court. Henry remarried within months. The court danced again, and the world swiftly moved on. As for Catherine, she vanished, not just from memory, but from the official record itself. Her name was scraped from paintings, her letters hidden away in archives, her very existence reduced to a mere paragraph in the annals of royal scandal. But history, like ancient stone, has its cracks, and through them ghosts sometimes seep. Children visiting the tower report seeing a pale girl pacing. Tourists often feel a sudden, inexplicable cold. Guides whisper tales of a queen in white, walking barefoot, always rehearsing her final moments. The rumors surrounding Catherine did not cease with her death. In fact, they multiplied. A maid swore she saw Catherine's ghost kneeling in her cell hours after the execution.
A guard reported faint singing, not weeping or screaming, but something lilting and girlish in a minor key, the kind of melody that lodges itself in the teeth of your memory, refusing to be swallowed. Yet the real haunting was not confined to the tower. It was in what came next. King Henry VIII never spoke her name again, not once, not in court, not in prayer, not even on his deathbed. And yet he kept something, perhaps a ring or a letter, though no one ever confirmed which. The old king was seen staring at his hands more often after her death, as though searching for something he could no longer hold, or perhaps had never truly possessed.
He had ordered her death, and yet even the king himself could not fully bury her. The chroniclers tried their best. The official records reduced her to a single dismissive sentence: Queen Catherine, formerly of the Howard family, executed for high treason. That was all. No mention of her youth, her past, or her enforced silence. The scribes who meticulously documented kings, wars, and alliances had no space for a girl who died wrongly. She became a mere footnote, a cautionary tale, a whisper, anything but a person.
Centuries passed. The executioner's axe rusted, the scaffold was dismantled, and the tower walls were cleaned and repainted. New queens walked those ancient halls, adorned with different jewels, fearing different fates, and still she lingered. But to truly understand why Catherine refused to fade, one must comprehend what was ultimately taken from her, not just her life, but her very version of it. Because here is the truth no one likes to utter aloud. Catherine was not executed for adultery, she was executed for memory, for the things she remembered, and for the powerful people who wished she wouldn't. Francis Derham did not fear her love letters, he feared her testimony. Thomas Culpeper did not fear their secret meetings, he feared what she might reveal if tortured. And Henry VIII, most of all, feared his own reflection. For what is a girl bride, if not a mirror? What is a queen's body, if not a ledger of a king's sins? Catherine knew too much, and worse, she knew it too young. The Tower of London kept her bones, but the truth could not be buried forever in limestone and prayers. It leaked out through hidden letters, through hushed songs, and through the uneasy looks of courtiers who had once bowed to her but now refused to meet each other's eyes. She had been the fifth wife, the laughing wife, the too young wife. And when she died, everyone breathed easier, not because justice had been done, but because the inconvenient evidence had been destroyed. Yet memory is a dangerous thing, and Catherine's memory simply refused to obey.
In the 18th century, poets rediscovered her name, writing of the girl queen who danced to her death. By the 19th, historians began to question the official records. Why no proper trial? Why no witnesses called in her defense? Why no monument? These questions yielded no answers, only pervasive silences, and silence, too, tells a story. In the 20th century, feminist scholars powerfully reclaimed her. They highlighted the stark power imbalance, the grooming she endured, and the way girls like Catherine are punished not for their alleged crimes, but for their very visibility. They noted how swiftly society transforms innocence into provocation, how youth becomes blame, and how beauty becomes proof of guilt. They renamed her not Catherine the Adulteress, but Catherine the Silenced.
But even those noble efforts miss something deeper, something more unsettling. Perhaps Catherine was not merely a victim, perhaps she was also a witness to the ugliness behind the gold, to the cruelty hidden behind the crown, to the rot festering inside the grand Tudor myth. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is precisely why her ghost still lingers, not to be pitied, but to remind, to stand barefoot in the very place where she died and whisper, "I was here, I remember, and so will you."
The tower has no clocks. There is only stone, silence, and the chilling sound of your own name echoing from the mouths of people who will not speak it with love. Catherine's final days were measured not in hours, but in betrayals. The Duke of Norfolk, her own uncle, her blood, abandoned her first. He did not write, nor did he plead on her behalf, claiming ignorance of her moral condition to save himself, as if she were a poorly trained hound, and not the girl he had deliberately placed in the care of wolves. Then came the Dowager Duchess, the woman who had supposedly raised her. She sent no letters, offered no explanation, having survived too many reigns to fall on a mere girl's sword.
The court physicians did not visit. The guards spoke only in clipped tones. Even her confessor, a man of the cloth, looked at her not as a soul in need of mercy, but as a mouth too dangerous to open. In those final days, Catherine began to lose her voice, not literally, but inwardly. Her words thinned, her letters ceased, and her hands trembled whenever she tried to write. At night, she would press her ear to the cold wall, listening for any movement, any breathing, any sound that might suggest she still lived in a world with doors, with people, with hope. There was none. She asked once, softly, if she might see Culpeper. The guard did not reply, but she saw the fear in his eyes, not fear of her, but of what she might say if given the chance. In the hours before her execution, Catherine was given paper and told she could write to the king. She stared at the parchment for a long time, then wrote nothing. What was there left to say to the man who would bury her and then casually go to lunch? But she did write one thing. It was not addressed to the king, nor was it signed. It was found months later, hidden beneath her bedding, just a single poignant line. "Tell them I was not wicked. I was hungry, and no one fed me."
The morning came, grey, wet, and utterly indifferent. The city stirred early, as it always did when blood was promised. Women brought their children, and men arrived with cold meat and apples in their pockets. Some had witnessed Anne Boleyn's demise and now sought to compare. Execution, after all, was theatre, and Catherine was the show. They say she dressed carefully, not in royal jewels or French silks, but in pure, ironic, defiant white, as though daring history to misname her again. She walked alone. No music played, no prayers rang, only the rising murmur of the crowd as she appeared not like a queen, but like an offering. When she reached the scaffold, she looked once at the crowd, then at the block, and finally at the overcast sky. The sun did not watch. Her last words are disputed. Some say she forgave the king, others that she asked for mercy in the next life.
But one account, whispered by a nun claiming to have been in the crowd, records a different, quiet, barely audible phrase. "I hope he remembers me."
The axe was sharp. They had made sure of it. She was gone in one swift stroke, blood soaking the straw beneath the scaffold. The crowd sighed, neither in grief nor relief, but simply at the conclusion of a grim spectacle. They dispersed. Later that very day, the king went hawking, laughing loudly once when the bird missed its prey. He did not speak of her, not that day, nor ever again. But she remained. She remained in the tower, where children still feel inexplicable chills. In the chapel floor, where her bones rest beneath anonymous stone. In the letters she never sent, and in the poignant question she whispered just moments before death. "I hope he remembers me."
But the real twist, the profound irony, is this. We do remember her, and perhaps that is what frightens history most of all. Not that she died, but that we still hear her, still feel her breath in the cold air of February, still wonder what it truly means for a girl to die at 19, not for what she did, but for what she was allowed to become.
The day after her death, the scaffold floor was scrubbed clean, her white gown burned, the straw discarded, and the execution block returned to storage. There was no state funeral, no solemn procession, no tomb engraved with her name, no eulogy in Parliament. Just a body, wrapped simply in linen, lowered beneath the cold stone floor of St. Peter ad Vincula, beside her cousin Anne Boleyn. Another queen executed, another wife silenced. Their graves had no markers then, just cold slabs, just dust, just absence.
The court went on. Breakfast was served, letters were read, and Henry, still king, still swollen with divine right, never once mentioned her name again. He married again the next year, Catherine Parr, older, wiser, Protestant, the kind of wife who knew how to survive. But even she did not speak of the girl who came before her. Catherine Howard had not just been executed, she had been unwritten. And yet the problem with silence is that it echoes. At first it manifested in small things, a maid dismissed without cause for whispering the Queen's name, a guard transferring out of the tower citing bad dreams, a priest refusing to walk past the chapel alone. Then the stories began. A pale figure in white, barefoot, walking the halls, the inexplicable smell of rose water in the Queen's chamber, though no flowers had been placed, whispers, breaths, cold hands. But these were not mere ghosts. This was something deeper, something older, memory refusing to die.
In the decades that followed, portraits of Henry's wives became popular in noble homes. 6 frames, 6 faces. Yet Catherine's portrait, the real one, was lost, or perhaps deliberately destroyed. No one is truly sure. A few images surfaced over the centuries, claimed to be her, but none were ever confirmed. Some say it was a deliberate act, that no one wanted the people to remember her face, because to remember it was to remember the lie. Historians later attempted to tidy her story, labeling her foolish, frivolous, promiscuous, a silly girl, a lusty Howard, a mistake. Even as late as the 20th century, textbooks dismissed her as immature and morally lax. But moral laxity was never punishable by beheading, not for men, and certainly not without trial. The truth was this: she died because she was seen. She died because she had a history and a body that made powerful men profoundly uncomfortable. She died because her story, if left intact, would have shattered their illusion of control. For Catherine Howard was not a villain. She was a mirror. And kings, above all, hate mirrors that speak back.
But then something shifted. In dusty archives, scholars began to unearth forgotten letters, tantalizing fragments, and fleeting mentions in court records. An unsigned note, tucked away in a stack of Privy Council papers, offered tiny clues, quiet resistances. Slowly, painstakingly, her voice began to reassemble. In 1840, when the chapel floor was renovated, for the first time in centuries, someone finally wrote down the names of those buried beneath it. Anne Boleyn, Jane Boleyn, Margaret Pole, and at last, Catherine Howard. No grand plaque, but a name, a whisper made stone.
Opera composers invoked her tragedy. Novelists reimagined her life, feminist historians reframed her narrative, and through it all, ghost stories kept her alive in ways the crown never could silence. She became myth, then martyr, then something even harder to kill. A question: what if she had lived? What if she had spoken freely? What if history had truly listened? We will never know the answers to these questions, but we do know this. In a palace built on legacy and blood, she left a profound crack in the wall, a subtle flaw in the grand tapestry, a discordant note that doesn't quite harmonize with the anthem of empire. And once you hear it, you never unhear it again.
Catherine Howard was not truly forgotten. She was buried alive in a suffocating silence. But silence eventually breaks, and when it does, it doesn't scream in anguish. It whispers, "I was 19, I wanted to live, and I still do." There is a persistent myth that death ends a story. It does not. It merely hands the pen to someone else. For centuries, Catherine's story was told by others, by the men who judged her, the king who killed her, the chroniclers who erased her, the historians who misunderstood her, and the ghost hunters who transformed her into a wailing phantom. But what if she does not want to wail? What if she truly wants to testify? Think of her not as a queen, not even as a girl, but as a voice. A single voice in a vast palace built to muffle all dissent, and yet she spoke. Not in grand speeches, but in her very survival, in ink on paper, in the creak of old floorboards, in the moment when your breath catches in a place it shouldn't, and in the question that follows you out of a museum, out of a textbook, and into the night. What did she see?
There is no romance in her ending, no noble sacrifice, no tragic love story wrapped in violins. There was only bureaucracy and blood. A young girl, utterly alone, punished for things she was never allowed to understand, much less explain. And yet her story cuts deeper than those of heroes ever do, because she is real, and she wasn't supposed to last, but she did. She should have disappeared, but she didn't. She should have become a mere rumor, but instead she became a profound reckoning.
In every generation, there is someone who is told, "Be small, be quiet, be grateful someone loves you, be anything but difficult." Catherine was all those things until she wasn't.
and that is why she died. Not because she was bad, but because she stopped playing dead. What lingers now is not pity, it is recognition. You know her. You've seen her in a girl walking too fast at night, in a woman nodding through a meeting, hiding her fury behind her smile, or perhaps in yourself, when you chose to survive instead of scream. Catherine is not just a ghost. She is a warning, and a signal that forgetting is not harmless, that history has fingerprints, and that power, left unchecked, always circles back to silence the one who dares to say no. They wanted her gone, utterly erased. Instead, they got a legend. And that, truly, is the real revenge. Not haunting, not horror, but the impossible, undeniable fact that we are still speaking her name. Catherine, not merely a queen, not just a wife, not even solely a victim, just a girl who died in white and steadfastly refused to vanish. The walls breathed. That was the first thing she noticed in her confinement. Not the scuttling rats, nor the dampness, not even the biting cold, just that the walls, once solid stone, had taken on a rhythm. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. And every time they did, they seemed to whisper, "How did you get here?" She tried to count the days, but soon lost track. Then she tried to count her prayers, but gave up. Eventually, she stopped trying to count anything at all. The room was too quiet, save for the constant clicking of her nails, on the wood, on the stone, on her own skin. Anything to remember that her body was still hers, until it wasn't. They brought her food, sometimes warm, sometimes not. Once there was blood on the bread. She didn't ask, and they didn't explain. She dreamed often, but never of escape, only of stairs, always the same ones, a spiral staircase that led downward forever, her legs growing smaller with each step until she was crawling, and even that was too much. Then came darkness, followed by screaming, but not her own, someone else's. One morning the guard brought her a mirror, a tiny shard of polished silver in the bottom of a bowl. It was a mistake. She saw her own face and either laughed or cried. The sound came out wrong, like something cracking. She whispered to the cold floor, "I think I'm a story now, but I don't know who's writing it." She wrote one last time, this time on the cold stone wall, scratched with a spoon. 3 words. Not a prayer, not a curse, not a plea, just, "I was here." When they finally came for her, she did not scream. She simply turned once to look at the wall and smiled, as if she had already read ahead in the script and accepted the inevitable ending. We return now, not to the cold stone of the tower, but to us, to the reader, the viewer, the world that consumes tragedy like opera. Because here is the truth. We love doomed girls. We romanticize their fragility, their mistakes, their poor choices. As long as they die before they age, before they become loud, before they learn how to wield power instead of merely pleasing it. Catherine was perfect for us. She died pretty, she died young, she died conveniently. And in doing so, we made her into everything but herself. There is a particular room in the Tower of London. Tourists pass through it every day. Some glance, some linger, but few truly understand. The guide states this is where Queen Catherine Howard was held before her execution. And then they move on, to the crown jewels, to the ravens.
to the gift shop. But sometimes, not always, not reliably, someone stays behind just a little longer. And they feel it. The cold spot on the floor, the pressure in the chest, an impossible ache, like remembering a memory that isn't truly their own. Because she is still there, not as a ghost. No, ghosts wail and scream. Catherine does something far worse. She waits. Not for rescue, not for pity, not even for justice. She waits for someone, just one person, to understand what was truly taken from her. Not her crown, not her body, not her life, but her voice.
The crown never apologized, and the history books never truly wept for her. Even the stories that attempted to reclaim her so often rebuilt her as something she never asked to be. But she is patient. Time does not frighten the silenced, for they know how to count by centuries.
Now in this age of blinding light, incessant noise, and overwhelming digital clamor, we claim to know so much. Yet there are still girls like her. Still metaphorical rooms with no doors, still voices being rewritten in real time. And Catherine, she doesn't need to haunt them. She is in them. She exists in every girl who learns that being pretty means being punished, in every woman called foolish for loving too fast, and every survivor who was told you should have known better.
But now we know better, and knowing changes everything. When you speak her name now, not from history books or as mere gossip, but in truth, you are undoing something profound. You're returning something that was stolen. You're making her real again. Not as a saint, not as a scandal, not as a wailing ghost, but as Catherine. A girl, 19, laughing too loudly, loving too fiercely, and dying far too soon. She was not born for tragedy. She was brutally pushed into it.
And she is still waiting for us to pull her out of that forgotten silence. So when you walk away from this story, do not say she haunts the tower. Say instead that she haunts silence. And may she haunt every silence we allow to continue, until someone finally whispers back, "I hear you."
May her enduring whisper remind us of the stories that deserve to be heard, and may your own rest be peaceful and profound.